Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to my first Eternal Top Decks video since the release of Omens of the Past. So let's dive right in. The first deck that I want to share with you guys is my Argenport Stompy, my Bartholo Stompy. So the thing is, I have heard a bunch of people complaining about like how Argenport sucks and there's no good Argenport deck, and I would like to disagree. I've been playing this deck quite a bunch. I'm currently in the top 10, I think rank 8, depending on fluctuation. I climbed on stream yesterday from around 150, back in the top 10. I think the highest point was like 7th or 6th. And this is one of the decks that I played. I currently have 30 tracked games with the deck, plus a bunch of untracked games. And over the 30 tracked games, my stats are 21-9. The deck has been crushing pretty well, and before I started tracking, I even played the deck quite a bunch without tracking, just to get an idea of roughly what works and how promising the deck is. And once I felt like I have a list that has a good core and feels like a strong deck, I started tracking my results to see clearer how well it's doing. And yeah, over the first 20 games I even was like 16-4, and the last 10 games I hit a bit of a bad run and went like 5-5 to put me at a total of 21-9, which averages of like around 7-3 in 10 games, so 70% win rate. That is pretty impressive, and this is one of the decks of the new stuff that I brewed and tried that feels the best and the most powerful. The deck usually is very capable of racing any other aggro deck. I have been doing pretty well against Skycrack aggro and other fast aggro decks, simply because this deck hits so hard. A lot of the time my opponent would be around 10 and I would be around 20 and have a demanding board position, and the opponent just has no way to ever recover. So let's talk about the card choices real quick. We have 8 1-drops. An aggressive deck needs, I think, at least 8 1-drops, preferably more. I think due to the nature of this deck, because it has like this weapon-centric element, having too many 1-drops is not that good, because they're not the best weapon carriers. They're just there to sort of make sure that we start pressuring from turn 1, and also both of these are reasonably good weapon carriers. Beetle, thanks to becoming a 2/2 flying, is actually a pretty good weapon carrier, even for Beastcaller's Amulet. And weapons like Jack's Knife also help the Beetle easier, make it easier for the Beetle to infiltrate, since, for example, if you're attacking on turn 2 with a 3/4 infiltrate, the opponent either has to jump block or give you your 4/4 flyer, which is really nice. And yeah, the Beetle has been surprisingly good. And the other one is District Infantry, which is the biggest and hardest hitting 1-drop in the colors and arguably in the game. The problem with this guy usually is a bit that he's has a bit of a variance to it, especially in aggressive decks that don't have that much power. Like this deck, for example, has 27 power, which is not that much actually. So yeah, there are some limitations to what how reliable District Infantry is, but the card still hits really hard and is another potential good carrier for Jack's Knife, because in the early turns this means this is like a 1 power 5/5, which doesn't really get stopped by anything short of a Titan. So that's really good. The card has been playing out more than well enough that I'm happy to play it, and the next options like Knife Check and stuff are just too underwhelming, and or also have tension with Jack's Knife. Like playing Knife Check and Jack's Knife would be a bit too much damage to ourselves, even for an aggressive deck, especially in aggro mirrors. And then yeah, we have 2 other 1-power cards, the Jack's Knife that I already mentioned. This card is incredibly good, incredibly powerful. This is close to the power of Rancor back in Magic, when Rancor was really good, but instead of a recursive +2/+0 and Overwhelm, we get a permanent +2/+2, which has its very own benefits, since the extra health boost makes it really hard for the unit to usually be killed in combat, and generates a lot of tempo because your opponent has like this one big blocker, and then drop a Jack's Knife, and suddenly your opponent has no more beneficial blocks and you can keep pushing. And of course, Finest Hour, the current best combat trick in the game, to make sure that our units actually can keep attacking. And in a deck like this, combat tricks are much more flexible offense and defense wise than removal usually is, so Finest Hour does a great job here. Then we have the 2-drops, consisting of 4 Argenport Instigator, 4 Auric Bully, and 4 Overseer. Instigator, still probably the best 2-drop in the color combination, and one of the best 2-drops in the game. The ability also lets it synergize really well with Beastcaller's Amulet, which is important. The deck needs enough early drops to make the turn 3 Amulet reliably trigger. Instigator is one of those. Then we have Auric Bully, which is a new premium 2-drop, since the card is virtually a 4/3 for 2, which is really good because this deck has 14 weapons, so the deck is very capable of turning this guy into a 4/3 very quickly, making it quite the powerhouse for a 2-drop. It's not that good of a Beastcaller's Amulet carrier simply because it has no evasion, and the amulet doesn't give health, so it turns it into a 5/3, so it still trades with a lot of stuff. But sometimes it's just fine to put the amulet on it and get in if the opponent only has a small blocker or no blocker at all. But yeah, usually this guy comes down on, like, if you have an amulet, this often comes down later with like a Jack's Knife or stuff like that, or a Hammer of Might to turn it into a big threat. And last but not least, we have Tinker Overseer. Nothing too flashy here, deck doesn't even have any relics, but turns out a 2/2 flying is already a pretty decent deal if you're running a bunch of weapons, especially with Beastcaller's Amulet. This is the second 2-drop that allows us to trigger our amulet on turn 3, which is very critical for the deck. And yeah, it's also generally a good weapon carrier and a nice target for Hammer of Might's buff. And in addition on 2, we have 2 more combat tricks in Rapid Shot. It is possible that the deck might even want more than 2 Rapid Shot, but right now the deck has like 6 combat tricks that allow it to push into whatever blocker and deal with it. The combat trick heavy removal, combat trick and weapon heavy removal light approach has felt pretty good and has some really nice benefits, like not having removal when the opponent doesn't have a target for it, not having the wrong removal for the wrong blocker, or having removal when all you want is some extra damage to finish off the opponent. And combat tricks can deal with blockers, can finish off opponents, and in the case of Finest Hour can even protect our units from some removal and relic weapons, which is really nice. Next we have the 3-drops for Bartholo and for Valkyrie Enforcer. Bartholo is like one of the new cards that helps make this deck possible. It's basically everything we always wanted Silverwing Familiar to be, in good, since the lifesteal is honestly not that important. It's much more important that we get a 2/2 instead of a 1/1, and that the flying is not flying but unblockable in a world of Sandstorm Titan and stuff like that. So this is actually already a very passable threat on its own, and with all the weapons turns into a really scary threat and is a great target for the Lethrai Falchion to win races the cheesy way. The ultimate is really just kind of a joke. It never happens. It's way too expensive and way too weak for what it does, so just ignore it. This guy is basically a Lethrai Nightblade with Aegis, which turns out is good enough in a deck like this. And yeah, Valkyrie Enforcer doesn't need much explanation. Card is just great. Great cost to stat ratio thanks to the added evasion, and also a way of dealing with some problematic stuff like deadly units that block, flyers, sandstorm titans, flying suppression, stuff like that. There's a bunch of nice things that the silencing does, and it's also just a great threat since it flies and is reasonably sized for its cost. And last but not least, we have Beastcaller's Amulet, which is both a weapon and actually a unit, since this deck is more, the card is more of a 3 power 5/5 that comes with an added +1/+0 weapon than anything else, because the deck is really good at enabling it between Blood Beetle, Instigator and Overseer, and if push comes to shove, a turn delayed on turn 4 on a Bartholo or Enforcer. Deck has lots of evasion, so making it really easy to activate Beastcaller's Amulet. And then dropping a 5/5 for cheap while adding a +1/+0 weapon is a lot of pressure and really efficient. The card feels really powerful and one of the major draws to the deck, I think, in my opinion, that sets this deck apart from, say, Rakano, since the comparison to Rakano is kind of obvious. But yeah, I think the more powerful 2-drops together with an upgrade on Familiar and Jack's Knife and Beastcaller's Amulet are the cards that make the deck different from Rakano, and in my opinion, from the impression so far, also better than Rakano, because the deck hits a lot faster and harder than Rakano, and Jack's Knife turns out is much more impressive than Warcry, since it's so much faster and more efficient and immediate, for example. And yeah, last but not least, we have some 4-drop weapons. The usual Hammer of Might. I considered Peacekeeper's Prod. The problem is the triple green is very restrictive, and the 1 less health actually matters quite a bunch, since you can slap Hammer of Might on a 3 health unit and then attack into a Titan, but if you do that with Peacekeeper's Prod, you're just gonna trade with Titan, which is pretty bad. Plus, the stun doesn't work against Titan. But yeah, the tempo swingy nature of the prod has some nice appeal, but yeah, a Hammer of Might overall just is a bit better, I think. And then we have 2 Lethrai Falchions. The lifesteal on Bartholo, or on just like a big flying unit, or even on a Direwood Beast from the Amulet, can do a lot in terms of races, of swinging races. The card is a bit so-so, which is why there's only 2, since +1 health is very little, so against some matchups the card can be very fragile, especially if not put on Bartholo. And yeah, there's the possibility that this could be like 2 Peacekeeper's Prod, or 2 Auric Runehammer, or simply 2 more Rapid Shots, for example. Not entirely sure on that. But yeah, this is what I played with the most, so that's what I went with, since sometimes the races can be closer and trickier, or you can fall behind early in a race because of your draw, and having some kind of comeback cheese mechanic to flip around races is nice, and Falchion is really good at that. So that's why I still have it. It's kinda nice to have some source of lifesteal in a very like narrow-minded aggressive deck like this that just keeps pushing, and when it's behind, so having the lifesteal when you're behind to pull ahead again and force the opponent to play your racing game is can be really valuable. And the rest is just 27 power, 1 monument, has a bit of a flood protection. The power is split evenly between Justice and Shadow. Arguably, one could make an argument to cut 1 Shadow, add 1 Justice, since Infantry is probably a bit more important turn 1, since it scales worse into the late game. And the other thing is that we have 8 3-drops that require double Justice, making it a bit more appealing. Normally you kind of would want 16 of each for your 1-drop, but yeah, this would give us like 16 for Infantry and 14 for Beetle, which should be fine. The other option, yeah, I mean, the Monument is clearly like the better one, and I don't think there's any benefit in like cutting this, because having a 9th undepleted Justice is not really necessary, and if we would turn it into a Shadow, we would kind of be back to where we started. It's kind of debatable, like I'm not 100% sure if I would want the extra Justice. I've been playing with 7/7 the entire time, but I have to admit sometimes it has been a bit awkward. Sometimes on 3 you can't play either, and that can be a problem. It's not that often a problem because you have enough 1 and 2 cost cards that you often can do some like 2+1 cost thing on 3 alternatively, or just have Beastcaller's Amulet anyway and don't want to drop one of the units on turn 3. But yeah, keep in mind that you might want to like shuffle around a bit between 7/7 and 6/8. Probably gonna play 8/8 for now a bit, after I had a bunch of cases where I was a bit short on early double Justice, and that can be very detrimental. So yeah, and 8 duels, 4 Diplomatic Seal, the usual. As usual, I'm gonna hop into some ranked games with the deck over 2 videos and show it in action as you're used to, so stay tuned for the first half of the games coming up. Thanks for watching.